it goes. All right, I'd like to call to order the February 5th meeting of the Chagrin Falls Board of Education. Mrs. Breedno, please take the roll.
Mr. Rankin?
Yes.
Mr. Kanziger?
Here.
Mrs. Rose?
Yes.
Mrs. Garvey?
There.
Mrs. O'Toole? Here.
Okay, please join me to stand and say the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge of
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, at this time, we're going to share the board committee updates. Please provide a summary of the last meeting and what's pending, or just say no report. The audit committee, Ms. O'Toole.
Tomorrow, February 6th, at 5:30 is a post-audit meeting. It's technically not an audit committee meeting, it is the auditors meeting of which the audit committee and board is invited. So it is not subject to sunshine laws. It's one of the exceptions because an audit is not a public document until the state accepts it. So
It's if a public auditor or the state auditor calls the meeting with the officials of the subject of the audit, which is our school, then it's under, I actually wrote down the code section, it's Ohio Revised Code 121.22D exempts that meeting, so that's why it was not publicly noticed in compliance. The meeting will not be public. Results of the audit, as soon as it's released by the state of Ohio, then the results of the audit are public.
Mary Kay, when you selected that date, I didn't realize we met in the evening. I have this one, didn't go into our house for a child. So I spoke with Ashley and she said she was comfortable with just that.
I did, okay, finish.
Okay, thank you.
It's an accomplishment.
Okay, anything else?
No, I think that's it.
All right, ready for the board policy committee?
That would be me. Let's see. Board Policy Committee met Tuesday, January 28th for a very brief meeting. We have one policy to discuss. That's update to policy JEB regarding entrance age for kindergarten and first grade. We concurred with the recommendations of the Gurney principal and kindergarten department chair that a date of August 1st rather than September 30th to be 5 years old to attend kindergarten is in the best interest of our district. However, for families who wish to enroll in a child in kindergarten who turns 5 after August 1st, there still is an avenue through testing and through our other policy. It's the acceleration policy. But currently the way our policy is, and most people holding their children back, we would have way more than 8 years worth of change, discrepancy between the youngest and oldest in the class.
So will this help that? Is that the intention of this?
Yeah,
Yes.
it'll help that issue. It'll also, it puts us more in line with other school districts. A lot of districts have gone in that direction.
Yes, 570 districts in the state by August 1st.
And to be clear, this is actually a recommendation for the 2021 school year. I'm sorry, 21-22 school year. We do want to approve it now, though, so we start sharing that this is the direction of the district with incoming kindergartners. So that was a little bit of a rush just to get it out there. So parents are on the fence and they see that may be into their decision.
Has the price for full day kindergarten, I know we talked about this the other day, but then someone followed up with me right after. Has the price been set for full day kindergarten for 2021?
We have not set tuition yet.
Okay.
But we haven't had the conversation about increases.
Okay. And when can parents expect to know for sure?
I imagine probably next month or so we'll have that.
Okay.
Yeah, I think actually that conversation was kind of going around today with some of the staff members dealing with some issues. And I think it was proposed at the same time that the other student fees were proposed.
Okay.
After concludes my report. And we do not have our next meeting set. We'll wait to see when we get the policy development quarterly from Ohio
committee,
Yes.
Mrs. Garvey.
No report.
Okay. And capital planning,
The only report is we're trying to plan a meeting. We've invited last year's members from the Facility Master Planning Committee to join the Capital Planning Committee. We're starting to get some replies on that. I think we're looking at a meeting within the next month or so. So more to come on that. And on Board Finance and Budget Committee, we did have a meeting this Monday. We met on Monday, February 3rd, to continue the evaluation of potential levy scenarios. We are right where we said we would be with regard to our levy cycle and what we promised the voters at the last levy, that the millage that they approved in 2017 would last us approximately 3 years. It's hard to believe it's been 3 years, but it has. The Board Finance and Budget Committee has now reviewed and scrutinized several potential levy scenarios and will now bring a recommendation to the board. At a high level, the recommendation includes that a levy is needed in 2017 for the district to maintain the current level of programming and student achievement. I'm sorry, it's needed this year in 2020 to maintain our current levels of programming and excellent student achievement. It also includes a recommendation that the board evaluate a trade-off between millage amounts for the levy and our ability to pay for recommended capital projects like the bus garage. The next step is for the whole board to have detailed discussions about the timing and the amount of the next levy, which I think will be at forthcoming board meetings in the next month.
okay. Thank you for the report. Next would be record retention. There's no report. All right, moving on, superintendent's reports. At this time, I'll turn the meeting over to Dr. Hunt, the superintendent's reports.
Thank you, good evening. I do want to mention before we leave capital planning, Frank Chagrin did reply. He's unable to continue with the group as he's relocating. And I just want to publicly thank Frank for all of his input. He added a tremendous value to our district, kind of putting systems in place, working with Chris diligently. And too often we take for granted those that step forward. Frank put a lot of time and energy into helping our school district over the last couple of years, so I want to recognize him publicly. In terms of my report this evening, this is a kind of an exciting night where we get to kind of share with you the work that's been going on throughout the district. I will, however, tell you we put a lot in the PowerPoint as a resource for kind of the community and the board, but the board will get full presentations on all of these goals as we go through the spring, with any recommendations that come out of them. So I've asked administrators to kind of move through the bullet points very quickly, but certainly if you have questions, it should be an interactive kind of conversation as we go through. We'll also share with you our student achievement benchmark data. We had our second testing window, so we'll point out some of the highlights of that data, talk a little bit about what's going on in terms of utilization of that data and what's going on in classrooms, and then we'll wrap up with a presentation on our ELA updated program. So to kick us off this evening, I am going to turn it over to Director of Curriculum and Instruction, Becky Quinn, to look at mid-year progress and goal update. And again, feel free to interject, ask questions as they come up.
Hi, everyone. Our first goal deals with curriculum, and it is really the review and refinement process. We have a curriculum cycle. Each year there are one or more content areas that are reviewed by the department across K-12, and recommendations are made. This is the year of ELA and social studies, but there was work related to curriculum that was within our district goal in all 4 of the content areas, so I just wanted to highlight that work. In math, we are almost at a point where I believe it's now like 90% of our K-12 math classes have common assessments that have already been refined or developed. We have 2 courses that we're still working on in the upcoming PD days, but by the end of this school year, all of our K-12 math courses will have common assessments in place. We did receive notice that we are part of the modeling and reasoning pilot through the ODE. So that is a course that we will be offering at the high school next year. You heard a little bit about our hope for that at the December board meeting when we did course proposals, but we're very excited to receive news last week. In science, as we had planned, we proposed in December a new elective course for there to be environmental science as a non-AP course. So tonight, actually, one of the things that's being proposed is a textbook to support that new course. So we're really excited about that offering, and it is a part of the course selection guide for the 2021 school year. In social studies, you will actually hear quite a bit about our process and the textbooks that have already been selected across K-12 at our next meeting this month. There was just not enough time in tonight's meeting to do social studies too. But we have got kind of run through the gamut that we typically do, starting with assembling a committee of teachers across K-12, completing the gap analysis, which really serves as a needs assessment across the district relative to each course and grade level. We have identified non-negotiable characteristics as to what's important in a K-12 social studies program. We've reviewed programs throughout all of our PD days. They've been very busy doing so, and they have identified textbooks and programs to propose to the board. So you should be seeing that soon. There is demo account access for many of those programs, so you'll be able to enjoy that at your leisure. And we have started, and we will continue to work on the next few PD days on the development of curriculum maps or refinement of those to align with the new programs. Were there any questions about those two before? For ELA, there is a whole presentation that Katie Gill and I will be providing later this evening. So we will kind of in more detail go through these things, but same thing as with social studies, starting with kind of looking at what's out there, looking at what programs exist, what are things that are strong points that are already working in the district, doing a needs assessment and kind of working through a process. So I don't want to ruin anything for our future presentation. The second goal that we have this year is related to our grading practices and refinement, review and refinement of our grading practices. So our systemic work really kicked off last spring when Myron Dewitt came to district and met with our K-12 staff. Also met with our BLTs in the afternoon and helped each BLT to identify kind of a plan for the school year. So this year we started with the book, with book studies occurring in each of the schools, and we identified homework as our first topic to kind of tackle, and we had two principals that kind of took that on, Layla DeSenza and Rachel Jones. Bless you. And they've led those discussions in DLT, and we've done a lot of decision making and a lot of discussion at the DLT level, and then it gets pushed down to the BLT level. So it's been a lot of great work. We're continuing that through March, and then that's when we'll kind of transition to the next topic that we'd like to work on, which is retakes, redos. With homework, it was just such a good conversation, but I never thought it would have been so time consuming and that there would have been so many differences across K-12, everything from how homework is defined, and then what's the purpose behind homework. So it really was great to have our teachers that are part of DLT as a part of that discussion, because I think we've really done some good work and we've come up with some good things, so leading us into next school year.
So when will the board hear what direction you're heading with regards to potential change practices?
So that's a great question. So what we decided at the last DLT meeting earlier this week was that we wanted there to be enough time for thoughtful implementation, because while some of the proposed changes really would not impact some of the buildings, like the high school, would affect everything that a teacher does, from how they build their units to how they do their other forms of grading. So we felt like we wanted to be very thoughtful. So we're thinking that it would be implementation possibly of that and retake for 21-22 school year. So that will give us time to kind of wrap our arms around that. And because redos and retakes kind of go along with the homework piece as well, and if you're really moving in a direction of standards-based grading, the redo retake has to be in place first, because otherwise it would penalize students. So
I can tell you, I had a brief conversation with Rachel today. We're on kind of a follow-up meeting, and he's going to listen to that as well, and talk about what implementation looks like over the next year or so. I think different buildings are in different places. We all need to have in the same place what can we leverage from this work. But I think what you'll see is kind of a philosophy and purpose on homework, kind of direction we're going to see what that looks like this year. There's actually been conversation about percentage of grade and what that might be. I think that's where it gets sticky, and we got to spend more time with our teachers and work through what makes sense where. And then we'll kind of lay that out. It's one of those goals I think you'll see kind of laid out in the next couple of years.
Do you think you'll see a change to the homework practice in advance of, like, maybe sort of chunking that out before you get to the goal of the standards-based grading, or will it be all one comprehensive?
Yeah, I think you would see, especially when you start talking about standards-based or mastery-based at the secondary or high school level,
Yeah.
that's a dramatic shift.
Right.
So I think creating buy-in around what the purpose and philosophy is and looking at the quality of it and continuing K-12, we will see change there well before you see some kind of mastery-based or students-based at the secondary level.
I think that too, through the book study, as teachers are kind of growing and understanding is the purpose behind the changes, I think we'll see lots of teachers just adjusting things naturally within their classroom or grade levels, making changes too. So it's just been a really interesting and enjoyable process.
It's a good choice.
Yeah, that book, in comparison to the other book that we were saying, is just much more user-friendly. It's very real. You can tell he works in a school district. So. Now we'll move on to another profile.
Standard person.
So goal 3 is really kind of phase 1 of the strategic plan, and it was the concept of the development of a learner profile. And I should have said this to begin with. There's literally hundreds of people behind all of this work, and a lot of us working in Harper's helped me along with and certainly Academy. We've seen more versions of trees and visual representations of this thing than I care to like to admit. But we have kind of gone through the process in the development. I feel like we've got a very, very good draft of the learner profile. There were 4 design team meetings. Greg was able to, I think, to attend most of those. Originally, we started and thought we would do 4 and just do focus groups. But I do want to bring and give those people an opportunity to come back and see what changes or modifications have been made based on the feedback of the focus group. So I'm actually bringing that group back together next Wednesday night to just kind of share out what we've learned and what we've heard from our focus groups. So it ended up with kind of 9 competencies. I think we're still wrestling a little bit with some of the feedback on those. I sent that feedback out to the design team, and I think there might be tweaks when you come into this last meeting. We did do an inter-council focus group, staff, parent group of about 30 or so parents, and then local businesses is actually happening early next week. So Chamber of Commerce was nice enough to send out an invitation for me, and we've got local businesses come in to really focus on these competencies and give us kind of a business side and perspective on our learner profile. So there is the most latest rendition of the profile, the 9 competencies, some of the feedback that was given here, as well as the focus group has been incorporated. Whether that modifies or changes, we'll see over kind of the next week or so. Certainly, as you kind of dig into that, or I guess soak it in if you have additional feedback, just let us know. But really, this should then kind of wrap up the learner profile portion of this, and we get into, okay, if this is the kind of the North Star of the district and where we're headed, where are our gaps in terms of what we're doing and what we need to work on? What data do we need to look at and obtain from our community to understand the direction we want to go with this? And we would get more intimately involved with actual action steps that we are going to do. We're going to look at kind of obviously the academic side of things and how things are going. I will tell you from survey data a year ago, from what we're hearing from focus groups, 2 things are prevalent in the conversations we're having. One, this whole idea of mental health and stress. So I keep hearing that, and how we address it and what we're going to do with it, I think needs to be in this plan. I think something will evolve around that. And the other issue is this issue of time. The amount that is on the plates of staff and how we're going about implementing all of these things. How can we study, be creative, and look at time in a way that helps our staff do the things they want to do for kids? So those are the 2 things I would just put on the front end of I know are going to be, coming to the table. Obviously, there'll be a whole pillar goal in this around efficiencies and operations, which the board has to be heavily involved with, kind of on the financial side, also rolling in our capital plan as part of this as well. So that's kind of where it's at. The process will kind of move in that direction at this point. In terms of the learner profile, there will be one more activity. We have rolled this out with different staff members, different focus groups along the way, but the entire staff hasn't seen it. So they'll see an update of very soon. But I also, in April, want to bring the entire staff together, introduce this to it, show it to them, and begin working on a continuum. So that graphic is really pretty and nice if we hang it up. But if we hang it up and do nothing with it, it really doesn't have any meaning. So we're going to take the next step of this and really ask our teachers, like, if these are the competencies we believe in, if this design team and staff and these focus groups of parents and teachers and kind of believe in these competencies, what do they look like? Let's describe what they look like from an elementary to a secondary perspective. And that will really provoke the conversation and next steps and making this happen in classrooms throughout our district. And then we've talked a little bit about the next steps in terms of strategic planning. We will go into kind of some further data gathering. Then we'll look at and say, okay, what are our themes, what are our goals, what are our action steps? Last administrative team staff is going to be involved in that, and eventually, ultimately, the Board of Education will sit down and wrestle with it. And again, I put that efficiency operations side. We need to be intimately involved from the beginning of the conversation with the Board of Education. So that's a little bit about where we're at with strategic planning.
With goal 2, before you and Greg go back to the group with the feedback, there was an article in the New York Times last week or the week before about emotional intelligence, and they coupled categories well. There were like 5 categories, and you might want to look at the terms they used and see how it aligns with, because I know there were a couple who were still struggling.
Right.
And empathy was one of them, but there are, like, self-awareness was another, and it was a well-written article.
You have access?
Yeah, I can send it to you.
That'd be great. Appreciate it.
I think
Any other questions?
that might be right on my technological bill.
Hello. I'm going to share with you the update on the 4th district goal, which is the MTSS goal. So MTSS, again, stands for Multi-Tiered System of Supports. I've decided my whole job is about triangles. Really, it's about thinking about triangles, thinking about tiers of intervention on an academic side and a behavior side. Because we want to make sure that while we're supporting academic growth, we're also supporting social emotional growth. So first, I'm going to share the updates and what's going on the behavior side, okay? Remember, again, red, yellow, and green. You're going to see it a lot from me tonight, but it basically means green are those universal supports that we provide all kids. It's our general programming. Yellow are those tier 2 supports that we provide some kids based on their needs, and then the red are those tier 3 supports which go to few students. So what we need to do as a district is make sure that we have a system of supports and that we know how to move kids from one tier to another based on data. So on the behavior side of things, we are looking to build and strengthen our tier 1 support by having a strong PBIS program. PBIS, Positive Behavior Interventions and Supports. So we are making sure that all of our buildings are in alignment in terms of having common behavioral expectations and explicit teaching of those behaviors. We started this work last year. Gurney and the intermediate school rolled that out this year. The middle school and the high school needed one more year to kind of get everything in place, and we are moving towards full reveal, I guess you would say, across the district in terms of consistency in those behaviors and the explicit teaching. We are working on continuing to provide community programming because a strong tier 1 behavioral supports is making sure that your parents and your families know what social emotional competencies are. I'm guessing, Sharon, that New York Times article spoke to some of those exact same competencies. So we did a study in conjunction with PTO's offering of Dr. Lisa DeMoore, who spoke last night about girls and stress and anxiety. She gave a great presentation. It really was very co-ed in nature, but it talked about a lot of the same things that are coming up in the focus groups in terms of how do we help support kids. So we want to continue to build our community and parent involvement so that we can further strengthen that tier 1. At the building level, we are also continuing looking at tier 1 programming. The middle school, specifically 7th grade, has been using Dojo, if you're familiar with that at all, as kind of a way of tracking student behaviors and reinforcing and rewarding kids for when they're doing what's expected of them to be doing. Okay? The other big thing we've done to help strengthen our tier 1 for the behavioral side is we've started to collect some social emotional learning data for the first time. So we use a tool called Panorama, which measures social emotional learning competencies, and it also helps us look at teacher perceptions of students in those social emotional learning competencies as well. So I'm going to sidetrack just for a minute and explain that to you a little bit more. Okay, we conducted Panorama surveys with students throughout the whole district back about the first week of December or so. I'm going to explain it, it's a little confusing. So 4th graders through 12th graders took a total of 10 surveys, okay? We looked at grit, growth mindset, self-efficacy, self-awareness, self-management, school safety, engagement, rigorous expectations, sense of belonging, and teacher-student ratios. We then, for grades K through 3, because they might not be able to read these big words, the tool is set up so that a teacher gives us a perception of the student's competencies in each of these areas. So those are all the areas that we collected data on. And then we get reports, which help us analyze those results and figure out what to do with them. So what happened basically is students took these surveys and they rated their response to the question. And then Panorama gives us an average. And the way this basically is interpreted is for grit, for that competency, 54% of the students who took that assessment gave it a favorable response, meaning they rate themselves as having grit. So we got district-wide results on all of the different areas that we assessed, and it compares us to a national norm for that competency. Now that norm is based on Panorama's huge database. So of all the students that have ever taken that assessment, here's how your score compares to all of them. What we're doing at a district level is we've rolled this data out to our district leadership team, our PBIS teams, and our building leadership teams. And at this point, it's starting to trickle down to staff at individual buildings. And we're highlighting those areas where the results maybe weren't quite what we wanted them to be. So specifically, the first one, engagement, if we look at grades 6 through 12, the engagement data is ranking really far lower than what the national average was for that competency, so that's an area that we want to look further at. The other one that I can tell you that people are interested in is the sense of belonging at grades 6 through 12. Less than half of our kids are giving a favorable response to that competency. So we're going to use this data to really dive in and figure out what do we need to add to our programming, change to our programming, again, to kind of develop that strong Tier 1 foundation. Questions?
Has any of us looked at, on an individual level, and how are parents looped in if there's, if I have a child who is showing a lot of red dots, I'd
Yeah.
like to know.
We'd like to know. Yeah, that's a great question. So we're not there yet. But yes, to answer your question, Sharon, we can dial down to the student level. So you can see for your student where they rated on each of the competencies that they took. So right now what we're doing is working with counselors on how to use that data, which I think is going to be valuable, because if you're a counselor or some other mental health provider and you're working on self-confidence with a group of kids or self-efficacy, you can target those kids that you think need a boost in that area, and then you can design your intervention specifically to that. So we haven't really decided how we're going to roll this out to parents yet or to students, because honestly we're still learning and understanding the data right now.
It's a delicate area, obviously, you
Yeah.
know, and I think part of what we do with it, and is as important as who is presenting it and incorporating feedback from parents and really giving it the best effort to be a positive thing for the students and families.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, a couple of things real quick. One, I think especially later, you'll see the work we've done over the last 3 or 4 years with student achievement data has really allowed us to target and understand where kids are at and who need to intervene with and put supports in place. As we keep hearing about mental health, social emotional health, not that the work wasn't good, but, and this wasn't exclusive to Chagrin, it's the global we, it's like we'll throw a program at it and see if it gets better, but we have no way to measure whether things are getting better or not. This kind of provides us with some context that, you know, and remember, this is one offering, one time given. You know, the goal is to do it at least 2 or 3 times a year, and you will really see some trends. The other thing is you can't, all of these, you know, 10 areas or 12 areas we could have added to it, you can't take all of that on. We're trying to get an understanding on, we know, you know, that, what was it, the self-awareness piece?
Sense of
We
belonging.
know the sense of belonging. It starts with a connection to an adult in the district. If we have kids that don't feel connected to at least one adult, that's a major high-risk factor. So we can start digging into those students and finding out, and then you have some conversations. Well, maybe the kid just can't take the sort of group off, or, yeah, I have some legitimate concerns there. So it's bringing that kind of analytic side to the social emotional piece. And we're in its infancy, but I think the power will be in kind of understanding and driving things based on data.
So the data's from a survey though, kids took,
Yes.
okay, except for K through 3 where the teachers evaluate.
Correct.
Jen, it's easy to see that many of these characteristics are the same as the ones that are in the strategic plan. Are these fixed, the characteristics that Panorama allows you to assess? Or
Yeah,
do we have
so-
some input on them?
Okay, yes and no. So
Okay.
Panorama has certain constructs that they build their survey questions around. And if you look at like the state's SEL standards, they align with some of those same competencies. What Panorama allows you to do though is ask open-ended questions and add your own questions. So for example, as the area I want to dive into, well, 2, the sense of belonging and the engagement one. So when we re-administer, we can make the determination that we're just going to further probe into those areas, and we can ask open-ended questions to try to dive in and get a little bit more qualitative data out of it. Does that answer your question?
It does, and I'm thinking I might be complicating things by trying to put 2 things together that don't necessarily go together. But this type of an assessment would be a great measure of our success in our strategic plan to build the competencies that we've defined for student success.
Yeah, there is a connection there.
Okay.
Not every competency. We picked competencies as that draft came out, so some of them we intentionally did that so we could start tracking data. So
Okay.
there'll be metrics there.
There'll be some things that match, and then the ones that don't, is there a way to include it in this, even though it's not necessarily
I don't
related
think we
to
can
social
create a
emotional?
construct. We may be able to ask questions around it,
Right.
but I'm not sure how
Okay.
scientifically.
There were also areas that we didn't choose to administer because we had to be thoughtful about the amount of time it takes a student to take a survey, how much instructional time
Sure.
they're missing.
Right.
So there are other constructs that Panorama will help you measure. Can't recall what they are off the top of my head, to be honest, but we chose the basic, kind of like the set core SEL standards.
And how long does it take for the 10?
It
parents
took,
to be
for
assessed?
them to, for the 6th through 12th, no, I'm sorry, 4th through 12th graders to take the test, it took them about 16 minutes.
16.
That's not bad.
No, it really wasn't bad.
Also think of other questions as potential filters. So I actually was in the BLT, or the staff meeting at the high school today, which just saw this data for the first time, and they were working in small groups and we had a conversation. Boy, wouldn't GPA be a good question here? Because if we could use that as a filter, could we see that there's higher levels of engagement or disengagement, however you want to look at it, based on how you're doing academically? Maybe that is true, maybe it's not. There's a way of starting to parse out this data so we can take meaningful action.
Marry it with other data you
Sure.
have that, so yeah. And then also I'm noticing the grade breaks are not the ones that we currently have in our buildings. Is there a way to customize that?
So when we break it down by building, we can get you by very specific grades.
Okay.
Panorama's setup is by grade bands. So the questions fit into either the 3 through 5 band or the 412 band. But what I have here is just a broad district summary. We can break it down by grade, we can break it down by teacher.
Okay, and by building.
And by
So
building.
it might be, I mean, just something for you to think about. For us, it might be more informative to see the building band
Sure.
summaries.
Sure.
So you kind of get a sense of the culture in a building.
Yeah.
It's
I
hard-
could give you a whole meeting on the panorama.
Yeah,
Well,
no.
that's interesting because the one with the red dot with the engagement, the belonging piece.
Yeah.
Immediately I wonder how the middle school fares on that because they have such a strong effort to have teachers, you know, I know each of the teachers is paired up with connecting with the student, and I see the post-it notes on the
Yeah,
lockers.
like
and
where is it exactly?
Yeah.
It's,
Yeah.
maybe sixth grade is fine.
Right,
And
exactly.
it's eighth, you know, who knows?
And that's just the level
know.
of detail we're looking at for at the building level. So when, like Bob said, when he met with the high school staff, they saw just the high school data broken down by grade. I can tell you that the highest level of engagement in high school, you want to guess?
11.
12.
So,
Yeah, it drops 9, 10, 11, and then peaks higher 12 than any other grade.
and it's just-
They're not, right, one of the courses that they're enjoying, they're self-selecting really what they're doing. So, a lot of, it's pretty.
Is there other ways you're measuring this other than just taking a survey?
This is really our first stab at it. There really aren't,
At work, when I get a survey
Yeah.
back, I don't like it. It does not line up, like, I need to talk to the person
yeah,
to get any sort of meaning out of it. So I'm just
Well,
wondering if
I'm
there's
going
any.
to come back to, this is one offer.
Right.
So we're going to talk to kids. The other thing I'm going to do is I'm pulling a group of students together, high school students, and I'm just going to ask them, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to share some of this data and say, talk to me about this. What do you see here? So that, you know, that's not quantitative, that's more qualitative.
Right.
And I think those are the things we need to consider to add on as we go through this.
Yeah, 'cause I do find the qualitative stuff more beneficial to me. This is like a guide, it
mhm.
can help you, but I wouldn't see it as a be-all, end-all.
No, I think it's one piece of the puzzle. I mean, for every, whether I'm looking at positive behavior interventions and supports, or I'm looking at, you know, academic tiers of intervention, it's all about having multiple data sources to help you make decisions about designing and providing interventions. We've never had any data that even gets close to this. So when we're looking at a student, we're trying to figure out why are they struggling, and we can pull this data and say, well, look, they rated themselves. However, we then have the opportunity to meet with that student, or the counselor can have a guided conversation to try to figure out where do we need to go to support the kids.
So I think the discussions that come because of this are more important than the survey.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
that's great. Good.
As with so much data, right?
Data. Okay. One more thing about the behavioral side, we've also worked on tier 2 and tier 3. So through the wellness money from the state, we hired a licensed clinical counselor who we have termed a wellness coach to provide an additional level of mental health support to our pre-K through 8th graders. So she's in the district 3 days a week right now. She is working with 48 Gurney students, all in small groups for the most part, all on those SEL competencies. So some stress management, some anxiety management, conflict resolution, all of those things. 5 at the intermediate school and 3 at the middle school.
I have to ask you, after Lisa's talk last night, are you rethinking the title, wellness coach?
I am, and I think I bought into her conspiracy theory a little bit.
Yes.
Yeah, for sure. Tier 3, we are partway through our first year with the Chagrin Care Team, which is basically a high-level district-wide team that looks at helping families and students by providing wraparound support. So the best example I can give you is this team, which has representation from every building, including our district nurse, our school resource officer, psychologist, counselors, and so forth, meet to talk about families. And the reason that that's important is because it helps you provide a coordinated effort to support students and families that recognizes the role and importance of a system. So the kids that are referred to the Chagrin Care Team are really in that red zone of the triangle. They are kids who are freaking needy, who have maybe some needs in terms of housing, food, those types of things. We've never had kind of a way to organize and coordinate our effort to provide support to those families. So the Chagrin Care Team is our vehicle to do that. And then we're also in the initial process of setting up our threat assessment team, which basically, again, is a district level team that looks at assessing any student threats to the district. It too incorporates a lot of the same type of behavioral and social emotional data, as well as other sources of data.
Students who are a threat to the district, or students who are facing a threat outside school?
Students who may pose a threat. Other questions? Okay. Academically, we are continuing to work on looking at whether there are gaps in the interventions that we're providing to students at the different tiers of instruction. We did a kind of a gap analysis through our district leadership teams to see how our interventions are laid out between the different tiers. We are continuing to work on a system so that we can document and carry that documentation forward with the student over time, so that when they get to the high school, we have a way of looking back to see all what interventions have been put in place. Sounds simple, it's hard to do in practice, so that's kind of where we're moving next with that. Questions? I know, it was okay.
So the final goal you heard about tonight, I'll make sure I'm on the camera, is self-paced learning. Myself and a group of 13 teachers and administrators at the 7-12 level have been investigating self-paced learning this year. We've met 5 times now, and the first thing we realized at our very first meeting is that all of us had a different definition for what self-paced learning actually was. I think in my mind, I originally felt like self-paced learning was kind of an online only, where you would just kind of access your content there and kind of go at your own pace. No interaction with the teacher unless you really needed it. So what we did was we sat down, we found articles and research online. We all met and we discussed what it really meant to all of us. We created this definition. I'm going to read it because it's a little far. I don't like to read my slides, but in this case, we define self-paced learning as a student-centered learning approach that provides students with the appropriate tools and assets to make choices about the sequence and focus of their learning at their own pace, in their own way, and with a flexible environment that best meets their needs. So once we kind of defined what we felt self-paced learning was, we started to look at all the stuff we were doing here in Chagrin that kind of met that model. So we came up with 5 different models. I'm not going to read them all right now, but the point was we learned that we were doing some form of self-paced learning somewhat already here in Chagrin. So the next step was to go out and look at other districts who were truly kind of taking this to the next step and see what they were doing. So we held conference calls with 4 different schools. Let me back up. First, we developed questions that we wanted to ask those schools. So those questions were around assessments, their learning environment, how they communicated with parents, how they communicated with students, how students picked all of these choices. So we developed a list of, I want to say 25 or 30 questions. And then we found 4 schools in the general region, 3 here in Ohio and 1 in PA, that we called and spoke with. So we had conference calls with all of them. Most of the calls lasted around an hour. I have linked here in the presentation a link to both the questions and all of those conference calls. So we recorded all of them. Not everybody on the team was able to make it to those calls. So instead of trying to get everybody in there, we recorded them and shared it out with the group. And really what we learned was that self-paced learning is great, but the first step toward self-paced learning is flexible learning. And flexible learning really is more about flexing the time, the environment, and the schedule to make self-paced learning work. So at this point, we have reached out to high school teachers to see who might be interested in doing some form of a flexible learning model next year. We have a meeting set up on February 14th, myself and Monica Asher and Becky, to discuss some of the constraints around it and kind of begin to talk to them about what ideas they might have. From there, we're asking them to propose to us how they would flex one section of their courses next year. Once we hear that from those teachers, we'll sit down as a group, select some teachers, and kind of move forward with a potential pilot plan. The middle school is going to work on taking a look at how splitting the middle school and high school schedule would impact this model. So a lot of the things that we heard from those calls directly related to issues with that schedule being tied because of shared staff. So they're going to begin to investigate what that might look like and kind of split it up from there. Again, as Bob said, we'll have a much bigger, larger presentation on all of this, but this was the quick self-paced learning in a nutshell. Any questions at this point?
How does self-paced learning work when you're being assessed at the end of the class? So like you're taking an AP class, you're taking a class at the state test. Like how, I mean, it's a self-paced, but at some point you gotta go at a certain minimum pace.
Sure, so,
Yeah, I mean, some districts are doing it different ways, and jump in if you want. I know, like Mayfield, for example, you can accelerate through a class. Some AP courses, just take at the end. So like a block schedule at Hesston High School, you take a full year course, you done in January, and you don't take the test until the spring. It's just the reality of the AP environment, taking that course. In Mayfield, for example, if I finish my Algebra 1 course, and I want to move to Algebra 2, that may be in May as a traditional student would, or it might be in January because I chose to double the time and spend more time in class. We're like many dots from getting there in terms of kind of what at least we're talking about in terms of flexibility, because there's just a lot of things that have to logistically have to work out. I think the first thing we learned in all of these conversations was every one of these schools are very big, they're large, a lot of students, a lot of teachers, which provide them with some, I think, opportunities to be more flexible staff than we might have the opportunity to be. So, talk to the team, it's like, look at all these models, no one's telling you to bring one here, see what's out there, and then define what makes sense for us as a first step, and that's what we're at.
yeah, that was one of the, just to key up that was one of the recommendations that all 4 schools said, is that really the way they got started was asking their teachers what would work for them, giving their teachers time to get the coursework ready and kind of moving forward. Some of them have gone crazy with it, some of them are still kind of plodding along, but also, as Bob said, none of the high schools we spoke to were any smaller than 2,000 kids at the high school alone. We searched, I tried to find smaller districts doing this, and we couldn't. So I think a lot of people are in the same boat, they're trying to figure out how to make it work for them. But if you get a chance, listen to the conference calls. There's really interesting information in there.
Right, but so self-paced means going faster, not necessarily going slow.
Self-paced means going at truly your own pace. So if you're able to get through the content and take an assessment 3 weeks before I am, go for it.
Right, but what if you can't get it through? So my question is let's say you're doing self-paced learning.
Sure.
But you're not getting through the content in time to take that assessment that you're required to take.
So all of the schools we
Are you
talked to
gonna
had teachers would meet with kids to kind of monitor their progress. So if a kid was falling behind, too far behind, typically they got actually put back into the traditional learning program because they just couldn't, the self-paced model just didn't work for them.
And most of them have protocols, if you were at 70%, whatever it is, 70%, or you weren't at a certain benchmark by a certain date, you fell back into the tradition.
So does this typically then is offered more to the children who achieve mastery faster?
No, actually,
No.
because we asked that question kind of thinking this must be for accelerated students.
Right.
And no, it's a lot of the kind of average student really like the flexibility and choice that increases that engagement piece. And I would tell you that we're going to lose the word self-paced as we go forward here because we're not proposing that at least not now. I mean, it's more of how can we tinker and create some flexibility in schedule for students maybe to increase great engagement, maybe move things a little bit on their own pace, but we're nowhere near kind of proposing or ready to adopt what we've seen out there in terms of self-paced.
Mike, did you also look at private schools?
We did not look directly at private schools. I did a ton of Google searching, and anybody that one of these schools mentioned that they had looked at, we also reached out to those schools as well. No private schools came up in that, but if you know of one that's kind of going on, sort of happy to talk to them.
I know there's a student at HB that taught herself AP history during the year because it wasn't out there at their school, and so it seems like there's some element of potentially to examine some of our local private schools.
We still maintain our credit flex policy, so if there is a student that wants to propose learning something, outside of the school day, outside of the school year, with a tutor, they can do that. But I think what Mike's describing is spot on, that really we want it to be driven by a purpose or a need amongst our students and be something that we're able to sustain to with shared staff and other dynamics here.
There's a relationship there, right, between credit flex and providing flexible learning.
There could be, if it's something that we're providing and that we've created, we would need to go through the credit flex policy and that whole structure. That's typically something that a family would propose.
Right, like a new proposal versus something they could pick up off of a.
This is maybe offering some courses that we currently have, but maybe in a different way.
Yes, let me give you an example, and we want to meet with teachers and kind of work through what ideas, but you could say the alpha period that we're offering in AP research right now is flexible, fits that criteria. Kids can come in the morning, they can leave earlier. We want to empower those teachers. Maybe there's a Monday through Thursday model or a Monday, Wednesday, Friday model that you're doing blended. We're not dictating that. We want to hear from them. That is more kind of aligned with kind of where we're at today, rather than saying we're going to send 30 kids down to the Commons for half a day and they're going to do math and English online.
Right.
We're not there. I don't necessarily think that's the right thing to do.
Any other questions? That's it.
All right, any questions on goals? District one? All right, I'm going to jump into the student data report. Review report. And just as a reminder, we kind of developed a little bit of a scorecard that had some annual data that obviously hasn't changed, so we're not going to cover that. We're going to give you kind of an overview briefly on our most recent benchmark, talk a little bit about how buildings are using that, and then certainly open it up for any questions.
So we benchmark student achievement 3 times a year, grades K through 8, using the iReady assessment tool. That, at this point in year, that iReady data is helpful in 2 regards. It's helpful in terms of helping us know where kids are falling in terms of their achievement and projected proficiency for the state test in the spring. And it also gives us information on their growth. We're going to look at Gurney first. Colors are back. Green, triangles will be 2 in a couple slides. Green are your kids that are at and above benchmark. Yellow is just like a traffic light. Green is good, you're going, go. Yellow is watch out, it's a warning, they are, up to a grade level behind. Red is stop, what are you doing? They are 2 grade levels behind. So think of your traffic light. At Gurney,
Is this benchmark as of where they should be at, as of right now?
Yep.
Or is it towards the end of the year?
No, right now. This is where they are right now. So at Gurney, across all 4 grades, we have 80% or more of our students at or above where they need to be, grade level, at this time of the year. So that's wonderful. Similarly for reading, with one exception. In 1st grade, we have only 68% of our students at or above grade level. And so when Rachel and her teacher-based teams dive into that data, they pick out 2 areas of weakness, and they're the same 2 areas that they have pinpointed on previous assessments, phonics and vocabulary. So those weaknesses have been incorporated into the ELA programming and curriculum adoption. I'll let Becky talk about all of that next. We look at Gurney growth. We look at growth in 2 ways. We look at typical growth, which means based on where the student was when they took the test in September, what average growth would be for a student like that. And then we look at stretch growth, which would be what growth does the student need to make to get to that next higher level of proficiency. So if we look at Gurney, and here are the triangles, we can see that in reading, they went from 54% of their population at Gurney at or above grade level to 83%. So that's where you get to see one indicator of that growth. Okay, so that's represented for each tier for both reading and math. All students at Gurney, every one of them, is at least 50% of the way to their target growth. which is exactly where you want them to be. You're about halfway through the year, they're about halfway through to their target growth number. In math, 50% of the kids, in math, every grade is 50% of the way to their stretch growth. So that's really amazing. They're making tremendous gains in math, and I think a lot of that has to do with the Bridges and Bridges Intervention Program. Questions? Okay. We're going to go through the same kind of pattern with each building. Intermediate school looks just like Gurney in terms of we have more than 80% of kids at every grade level at or above benchmark for reading, and the same for math. So we're really doing a nice job in those buildings of getting kids where they need to be. When we look at growth at the intermediate school, we see the same pattern. Our greens on the triangle are getting bigger and bigger and bigger as more kids are at and above grade level. Our reds are shrinking. We have 50% of the kids already meeting their typical growth for reading, 30% meeting stretch, and at math we have 35% of the kids already with their typical growth and 12 meeting their stretch.
Why are you using the word already? I'm just saying, because
So what
already
hap-
implies that you're comparing it to the end of the year.
So what happens is when I take the test in September, I get a scaled score. Let's say my scaled score is 100.
Right.
The metrics of the test suggest that by the end of the year, I should grow 9 scaled points. Okay, so I should be at a 109 by the end of the year. I'm going to take the test now in January. My scaled score is a 109 already. So I have already met my targeted growth. So I have grown faster than the...
Already, they said you already met what they needed by the end of the year.
Yeah, so I've already grown more than the test would say I should have based on where I started.
Targeted growth doesn't mean they're hitting the indicator. So you'll see groups in the middle school students that are hitting growth, they're making progress, but that doesn't mean they're going to pass the test necessarily.
If I'm really, really low, my score is low, I can grow a tremendous amount, but it might not jump me to that next tier. Okay, so I could grow a ton, make a lot of progress, but that doesn't mean that all of a sudden I'm going to be proficient. It just means that I have a long way to go.
Someone could move through multiple grades in the at-risk.
Yeah.
But still be growing every year.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay? Middle school, reading, all students took the 7th or 8th grade test, depending on what grade they're in. We're approaching 80% in those grades in terms of kids being at or above benchmark. The data at the middle school, and really truly at every building, the way the data is used is to help realign intervention groups. So I know the middle school spent a lot of time in the last couple weeks looking at the data from iReady and teasing it apart so that they can use their intervention and enrichment time in their WIN period to target specific areas within the content standards. Math, okay, math at the middle school is tricky because your charts look a lot different, but I have to remind you that any algebra or geometry student at the middle school is not taking the iReady test. So at the intermediate school, whether you were in advanced math or not, you still took your grade level iReady test, but we stopped that practice at the middle school. So we only have 59 8th graders taking iReady and 85 7th graders taking iReady. So all of a sudden we have a much smaller population, and we've removed all of the advanced and high achieving students from that population. And that becomes important because when we look at growth, some of those students who are in that lowest math track might have the most amount that they have to grow in order to hit proficiency. So the middle school data gets a little trickier to interpret, and it really becomes important when we get to projected proficiencies. So if I run the iReady projected proficiency, it will tell me that I am really, remember 80% is your cut for proficiency to meet the state indicator. I'm fine in reading all the way through, really. Math, it looks like I'm okay until I get to 7th and 8th grade. And remember, we just talked about how there are fewer students taking those tests. But remember what we do in the spring. all of a sudden, we take those advanced 5th grade math students and we have them take the 6th grade test. We take the advanced 6th grade, we have them take the 7th grade test. So this 6th and 7th grade result gets padded by the advanced students from the grade earlier. Make sense? So what happens is we still have this exposed group of kids down here, but we also have an exposed group of kids up here because we have no advanced 4th graders in math taking the math test for 5th grade. So as we go into spring, those are the 2 areas that we're worried the most about. They were the areas that we were worried about when the report card came out in the fall. So I can tell you that if I tease out the advanced 5th graders from my 5th grade results, we're looking at a 77% projected proficiency. So we know that that is still the area where we have concern, where we need to make sure we're targeting that intervention. Questions?
So a real important point there is those 2 indicators in the report card are going to continue to be a struggle as long as we program the way we do. And there's ways to play games. You know, a year ago there were schools that were looking at double testing in the 8th grade. So take the algebra or geometry and then take your grade level test. But we chose not to do those things. So I think it's just important for the board, especially as these things come out publicly. And I'm not, you know, we're not throwing in a flag tonight. It's just the reality of how we are tracking kids through math. Leaves us exposed in 5th and 8th grade.
Is that
But
consistent?
also allows us to really target those kids, know who they are, and try to get the interventions. And I believe this, you can talk about bridges and implementations of bridges. I believe that program, especially on the intervention side, we're going to start to see less and less of that.
Is that a consistent practice through every grade, throughout the district, where if you are advanced, you take only the advanced assessment and not the state level assessment?
It's only in math, and it's only in grades 5 through 8, because of the nature of the course, that the content is an accelerated pace. So in 5th grade advanced math 5, they take 5th and 6th grade math, so they're fully prepared to take the 6th grade test. The reason why the advanced math 4 students don't take the 5th grade test is because they only start to dabble in 5th grade with a few of the 5th grade units. But then the pace really clicks in 6th grade, they do 7th and 8th grade math. And then in 7th grade, they typically would go on to algebra. So that's the reason. The benefit is that students are taking tests which truly align with the content that they're learning. And you have the benefit of the accelerated plus scores, so they're weighted scores, and typically our advanced students do quite well on those tests. But the downside is that it shrinks the population taking grade level tests.
Is it, so are the expectations from the state for proficiency, would they include advanced and honor students in what they would expect out of an 8th grade class? So I guess I'm trying to understand, I understand the statistics of having a smaller population, but 80-something is about half the class. So what does this tell us about the non-honors students and accelerated students, about their performance?
Well, I think from a math perspective, I think it, especially it being our older students right now, I think it's showing us that we needed a program like Bridges that was paired with a targeted intervention program, because the Bridges intervention program will really meet the students where they are. So if they missed a skill that was 2 grade levels ago, it pinpoints that skill and scaffolds all the way back up to grade level to catch them, because lots of students, it's year after year, they're struggling, and so those gaps keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And we can do front loading to get ready for tomorrow's lesson or to do tonight's homework, but the reality is that they're still not filling those gaps from several years ago. So I feel like our interventionists are doing a great job of using that program and identifying gaps and filling those holes, but it's just how quickly can we fill those holes, and then compounded with the fact that some kids come to us with, mid, elementary level, and they have those holes, so you have to figure out, how we're going to fill those. So it takes a while to fill them. So hopefully, with our students that started in Bridges in kindergarten, 1st grade, you'll see less and less students that are needing intervention over time, and
us students not being proficient on the test. Remember, our special education population is in that group of kids too. So I mean, you legitimately have kids in that 8th grade math band who have documented math disabilities. They're always going to be multiple years behind in terms of their math skills. So we can show growth. I mean, if I pull the growth report specific to the kids in those courses, some of them have already met their stretch growth or their target growth. And that's a testament to the intervention and the focus of middle schools really trying to give these kids in that content. But then also remember that many times those little math kids are also low ELA kids. So you have to kind of figure out where you can provide that intervention. It's a very delicate line to walk. Okay, other questions? Okay, I just wanted to highlight quickly the high school because they're a whole different beast. They don't have iReady. There is no universal academic screener at the high school level that is, widely used. So we have to really try to tease out from other data points information that helps inform our programming. So you've seen AP trend data before. I think it's on your fall scorecard. I've updated what we have most recently in here for that. This is really what we're doing at a building level to try to get some sense of how students are doing on standards. The whole math department is using Khan Academy and the assignment of Khan practice to track math standard practice. So what you have here is kind of an example. You see you have the standard. The second column represents where in the current curriculum it's being taught. The third column is the performance of students when they did that Khan practice at home, and then you see the math teacher's notes in terms of what do I need to do with that result. I need to provide more teaching. Here's how I'm going to address that. So we're really working with the math department to try to help them zone in on that standards-based type of assessment and using results to inform their practice. ELA, as we continue, and Becky will talk more too about developing common assessments and common rubrics. Those will go a long way to helping us kind of assess where kids are on the standards that we expect them to have. And then the last piece of data, this just came out recently. It's the growth data from the PSATs. What this does is it will take a cohort of kids and track them over multiple administrations of the same test. So when I'm a 9th grader and I take the PSAT, and then I take it again as a 10th grader, and then again as an 11th grader, and then I take the SAT in March, it will track that same cohort, and it kind of shows you two things. It shows you where your cohort is performing. Anything within this red, yellow, and green range is on benchmark. And SAT is going to define benchmark as being college and career ready. So you can see where our mean score, this is a picture representation of the current junior class, falls compared to the big benchmark, and then where our growth has been. And really what you can look at is where's the difference between where they set the benchmark and how we're performing. And you can see we're about 120 so points ahead of the benchmark, and we actually grow to about 140 points. So that would suggest that we're making a little bit more growth even than what the projections would be for that group of kids. This data all breaks down by strands and different areas of academic skills. So as we tease out part at the department level, it turns around and helps inform instruction. Questions?
On that data, on that last chart, just so the red, which I tend to think of red is not good.
Yep.
The red is growing, and that
No, this red is not good either. Red's never good.
Yeah.
This red is the students are below benchmark. They are not projected. If your scores are in red, you're not projected to be college or career
Right.
ready.
But as we go from 9th grade to 12th grade, the red is getting bigger.
This is actually, this is when they took it, 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th. The target goes up because they're trying to, if you're scoring down here, that range of not being college and career readiness grows in part because they don't want kids to be down there. You want kids up here. I know it doesn't sound like it's making a lot of sense. There's a yellow in here that you can't really see very well that you can probably see on your copy better. that they're trying to narrow.
Oh, I see, that's what, we're up there in the green, so that's just, I
Right,
get it.
right.
You should,
I
You should be going up in the green, but the red's getting bigger too because it's
This
shrinking.
many
No,
yellow,
no,
this
no.
many green, got it.
Yep.
Okay.
Okay.
We're all.
We're good, we're all green, we're good.
Yeah.
We're growing in green.
Okay,
Okay.
all right.
Other questions, thoughts? Okay.
Oh, thank you, Jen. I'm going to let you go be a parent now.
Who wants to
Well, I'll
clicker?
take it.
Thank you. We're going to bounce over to ELA, and I would just like to compliment Katie Gill and Becky for leading this initiative. There's been a ton of work with a lot of staff input along the way that has led to tonight. So I appreciate very much all the work, and turn it over to you.
Great, thank you. So first, we're going to kind of walk you through our timeline, which started actually at the beginning of last summer when Katie joined us as our K-12 literacy coach. Yay! And so it's very timely because it was kind of the kickoff of starting to gather what we were going to do in our approach for K-12 ELA review and refinement this year. So we spent the summer many days together starting to solicit information from districts across the state to see what programs they were using in ELA and to vetting programs, looking at ed reports to see which programs that were out there actually even aligned to the state standards in Ohio. So we kind of whittled down the programs and approaches that were of most interest, so we weren't all over the place as the school year started.
and one thing we learned rather quickly was that there wasn't just one program that was this whole panacea of language arts instruction, and it needed to be a multiple approach where things could be brought in. So that was a huge takeaway we learned from that.
Then we continued, we built gap analysis documents aligned to the state standards for each grade level and each English course across K-12 so that teachers could really be looking at how they're teaching and how it matches up with the standards, and helped us to kind of wash out which are the standards that we're really not doing a great job in teaching, or in which we felt like there were some partial needs where we didn't have resources to fully teach those, or we didn't have assessments in place to really know if there was mastery of those standards. So we gathered that information. Through August to November, we reviewed programs across the district that were really finding success. For example, in K-3, teachers have been using the Lucy Calkins units of writing for several years now, and that's been a success story. We also looked at some of the programs that are currently being used in intervention, like the LLI program for intervention, like Foundations for Intervention, to really see kind of how those programs work and what the possibility for future growth might be. We also identified a list of non-negotiable characteristics of a full K-12 program. You'll see those a little bit later, but it really helps us to guide our next steps. And then beginning in September through now, we've vetted and reviewed programs with our staff. We've really looked at piloting some of the programs. Some of the teachers at Gurney have piloted some of the programs in ELA with regard to reading, and you'll hear about the phonics pilot that we're just kicking off.
In November, we started our site visits, and I think this is sort of where it became very real, being able to see programming in practice. And I think a lot of teachers had a lot of aha moments, including myself, during this time period. So we spent time at Hudson and Perry, and we looked at the reading, writing, and phonics workshops related to Lucy Calkins' work. We also looked at the F&P, which is Fontes and Pinnell programming, that exists within that model and how it was being used to support the structure of the Lucy programming. It was hilarious because we would walk into the younger grades and there were like 25 of us, and the kids would start counting. 1, 2, it was so cute. So there were a lot of us. We had all the ELA classroom teachers, and we also had all the co-teachers in on this experience as well. Oh, then we had a rep from Heinemann, which was helpful because Heinemann publishes both Lucy Calkins and Fontes and Pinnell. So she came out to the district and gave another set of teachers an overview, because one of our biggest worries and concerns is, I mean, everyone at Gurney teaches reading, so we were trying to get everyone to see it, to get buy-in and understanding of what was going on. She came out and gave a presentation that also included the teachers, the intervention specialists, we had reading tutors and principals K-12, so that was a really powerful experience as well. So that led to, from December to January, deciding on the K-8, identifying the Lucy Calkins programming in reading and writing. In reading, K-8, but writing was already in use for K-3, so 4-8 writing as well. And we then did worked with the high school, and we were really working and still working on identifying commonalities in instructional practices and vertical alignment for consistency in 9-12. So that was more our work at the high school.
So as I mentioned before, I'm not going to read to you all of our K-12 non-negotiables. Some of them might seem eerily similar to those that you've seen in past years, where some of them are just common sense, that they must align to the state standards, they must prepare students for state assessments at a minimum. But some of these other things are more specific to some of the feedback that we gathered from teachers at different levels. So some of these non-negotiable characteristics are more important for high school teachers, whereas some of the others were more important for our K-2 teachers. But overall, this is kind of our list of K-12 characteristics that we feel like are really important for our programming. So that takes us to this framework which we developed, which is a K-12 framework. It includes a lot, but I think it's really valuable because it really showcases all of the work that goes on in K-12 ELA from K through 12. Of course, not all of it, like phonics isn't obviously taught at the high school level, but it all is connected and it all best prepares our students. And so it's really important to remember that all of these things need to be going on. And I think we had some examples when we were doing our needs assessment that we weren't doing a good job, or we weren't dedicating the time that we really needed to make sure that we were allowing teachers to really do all of these things. So we kind of collected lots of feedback from different levels of teachers and kind of put this all together for a framework.
So then we also took time to define our philosophies at each building, and this was really powerful. We had a lot of conversations about, well, what does best practice in language arts instruction look like? So we started at Gurney, and basically, sort of in a concise way, we go, when we're at Gurney, the children are learning to read, and then we get to, of course, the reading to learn. But as we go through each of the buildings, the comprehension piece is growing, the level of complexity with responding to text is growing, the integration of reading and writing across all curriculum areas are, it's big, it's growing, it's constant, it's more in depth, it's more analytical, it's more concise. So that's how we ended up at the high school slide. So we're, yes. So then
It got much bigger.
yes, it got much bigger. So we worked on that, and just my big takeaway from the high school was just, that clear, concise, and analytical thinking, being able to approach a text and being able to say, well, this isn't accurate. I can, differ from this opinion, and I can support my opinion using analysis and that type of thinking. So that was really powerful for each of the buildings to really put their beliefs into a statement that represented what they were thinking, and also helped us to align our programmings and our beliefs as we were going forward. We also then, right about that same time period, we're doing our reading competencies continuum. And basically what that is, it's a list of all the reading behaviors you would expect to see starting in kindergarten and going all the way through 12th grade, because one of the things we were finding through our gap analysis is common instructional practices were not always in place. And what was happening is if, say, a teacher was feeling that they needed more vocabulary instruction, they were going to a vocabulary method to help support the students, but we were losing a lot of commonality and common language and common experiences for our kids. So we went through the continuum and basically highlighted how the instruction changes from grade level to grade level, and really dug in. For example, in kindergarten, at the very root of it all, you have kids that are learning sounds and how sounds work together.
And the majority of this work is done orally, but by first grade, they're transferring that in print, and they're transferring it to phonetic awareness and phonics and reading and skills. So a lot of the work at Gurney has been, these are our foundational areas, this is what the instruction looks like here, this is how it builds, how do we scaffold that, how do we get the common language. So that's been a lot of my work in the buildings, really working to achieve that consistency and alignment of practice.
So we identified these 5 items as we were going into our site visits to really look at learning and look at teaching through a common lens. So it was really important, obviously, to have things that were aligned to our standards, that we saw a spiraling of concepts, a connection between learning from grade level to grade level, that there were opportunities for differentiation for our struggling learners all the way through our gifted learners, that there was opportunity for choice, for student reflection, for speaking and listening, inclusion of work that aligned with all of these things, that was operating at higher levels of learning, whether you're looking at Bloom's or you're looking at depth of knowledge, that our expectations were high for students, and that it included a variety of works, that students weren't just reading fiction every single year, but that there were a variety of genres that were reflected.
So this is the workup of what a Lucy workshop model looks like in both reading and writing, and it has each of the components. So the first component is the mini lesson, and then after the mini lesson there's a period of independent reading and conferring and all types of different applications that go on from the mini lesson. And then it ends up with the teacher then is evaluating where the kids are at and perhaps stopping and reteaching a point or moving on or adding to a point, and then the share out either with the kids and the teacher or just between the kids. And the thing that's really powerful about this is when we were in the site visits, we saw the same grade level doing the same lesson. So we saw a 4th grade lesson that occurred in 4 different classrooms. And our takeaway was that the teaching point was exactly the same, and it would have been very clear to anyone that that was a teaching point, but yet there was teacher personalization in each of the classes. So that was a really cool experience for us. And also, I think just by fate, I got to witness a standard that I know we've always struggled at the intermediate school. And to watch that teacher teach that lesson and see the level of rigor and the interconnectedness was just so powerful, because we were all like, that's that standard that we're all struggling with, and it was really valuable to see that. So that was powerful from the site visits as well.
I think another thing that was powerful for me from the site visits was seeing K through 8 and seeing the same structure in place and thinking about from the student lens, kind of knowing what to expect every year when you went into an ELA classroom. Seeing that in primary grades the teacher had all those kids on the carpet for the mini lesson and was in the rocking chair, versus 8th grade the teacher gathered all the students, but they had their desks around, they had their hoodies up, and they were trying to act cool, but they were really engaged in the lesson too. So it was really neat to see it kind of span all of the levels. So we also have had a huge pulse on phonics, realizing through our needs assessment, plus some of the data that Jen mentioned earlier, that we really had a need for a systemic approach to phonics, K through 2. And so we really have spent quite a bit of time this year kind of looking at what our practices have been in phonics and kind of determining that we have been all over the place. So we wanted to formalize, we want to identify a program that is consistent across those 3 levels. So we looked at the phonics workshop that is provided by Lucy. It just came out in August, so it is brand new. We did have the opportunity when we were in Hudson to see several teachers piloting the program, so we saw how embedded it could be within the reading and writing, and seeing students taking what they learned in phonics and looking for the same types of blends within their writing or within their reading, which was really neat. We do feel like, however, that it is a brand new program, and our teachers desperately wanted to see it, they wanted to use it, and now they want to pilot it before we rush into any decision-making. So this is one of 2 programs that we have 2 teachers within each grade level across K2 that they will be piloting now or in the next few weeks.
Yeah,
through
a pilot
April.
group started today at Gurney.
The other program,
So the other program they're looking at Gurney, and this would be 6 teachers as well, 2 per grade level, is the Wilson Foundations program, which is a very systematic, explicit, kinesthetic approach to phonics. And so this was another program. It's very manipulative. There are letters, there are whiteboards, and the children move the sounds around and tap out the sounds. So that was another program as well that we looked at. We generated a look for list for the teachers so that as they can collect data and information as they're starting their pilots. So we're hoping to have the last pilot group start within the coming weeks and then discuss in April. So we spent a day on Monday unpacking, figuring out where the teachers felt that they could jump in reasonably based on where they are with their curriculum, set up some pacing guides, got some materials organized, and it was very exciting. In the morning, I was with the Lucy group, and I was like, oh, this is the program. And then in the afternoon, I was in the Wilson group, and I was like, oh, this is the program. So it's going to be really interesting. So both groups are very passionate about what they're doing and excited to get started. So it'll be interesting to see where we land.
Do you know, does Lawrence use the Wilson?
They do. This is much, I would say, this is much more older school phonics, and it's been with the science of reading and children with dyslexia, and really all children. And what we found too when we were doing our initial interviews with school districts, a lot of school districts are using this as a tier 1, and they are using it in combination with another literacy program. So.
we are currently using foundations in intervention at Gurney, so our interest was kind of piqued in observing that teacher using it in small groups with students. So that is really the hope through the pilot, is to determine, is it appropriate for all students, or is it still something that we should retain for a specific population of students, but there's another program that's better for the masses. So Katie mentioned before that we're looking at some of the F&P or Fountas and Pinnell programs. This is almost an a la carte program, so there's different components that you can pick and choose. Our teachers thus far are interested in the interactive read aloud, the shared reading, and the guided reading. These are things that they would use in tandem with the Lucy units, knowing that within the workshop model, there are times where it's not the teacher on stage, but beyond the mini lesson, really the teacher isn't the sage on stage, the students are working. So it would be during that workshop time when the teacher would then decide, I'm going to pull a guided reading group at a particular level with a targeted skill in mind to do a lesson with them. So the Fountas and Pinnell program really provides the structure for all of those things, with some of the other programs with the big books where they're reading together as a large group in the primary grades. So these are not things that our teachers would not be able to construct on their own, but having a tangible program that they can immediately pull from, given that they're already going to be implementing the Lucy reading and writing, it just makes life easier for them and provides a structure for them, so it is very consistent across levels. So we are actually on our next PD day on the 14th in the morning, bringing the same Heinemann national consultant back out, and she will be meeting with Katie and with our K3 teachers, and we are receiving a delivery earlier that week of samples of all of these programs so that the teachers can truly dive in grade level by grade level and look at the programs and decide which ones are of most interest. So our high school work, so we've gotten all the way through 8th grade with our Lucy Calkins. With high school, we have done quite a bit of work with our AP and CCP teachers, working on just identification of the prerequisite skills, meaning what would it take for a student to find success within those courses, whether they're taking them in 11th grade, 12th grade, you name it. What are the things that they should, in an ideal world, that they should walk through the door already having under their belts. We also have kicked off some work in identifying commonalities, both looking at what should be an experience for all ninth graders across all of the English offerings that are available, and what should be a consistent commonality for all students within a particular course. So for example, all students in Honors ELA 9 versus all of the students that are in CP 9, and what is something that's the same experience for all ninth graders. So we're working on that. We're identifying common themes, common units. We're identifying which reading selection should be common. For example, is there a certain book, certain novel that all ninth graders should read regardless of your course? Looking at some common writing topics so that we can eventually move to a place of having some common writing assessments that are each quarter for each grade level. Jen had mentioned that before, our push to have common assessments in place for high school ELA because those students aren't taking iReady. So this will be a really helpful data point to have. We will in the high school have common assessments that are built for first semester by August of this year. So we have a lot of work that we still need to do, but we're well on our way. We also have spent some time on identifying common literary terms, and some teachers are still completing a Google form that is really identifying what are all the literary terms that you use within your instructional year, and then that will guide our work as to commonly defining those terms, because you'd be amazed at how different something like theme can be defined from level to level. And then what does instruction relative to that term look like within each grade level?
Have you considered reaching out to parents and students for feedback to incorporate ELA offerings at the high school? It strikes me that by that age, I think the students have opinions, and it would be great to incorporate some of their feedback if possible in this stage.
Sure. Yeah, I don't know if Monica has done that for any of the offerings, but that is a really interesting idea. So we might very well come to you next December with new proposals for courses. It's a good idea.
Well, and you may not even be new courses, but just things that they like could be more integrated consistently or
Sure.
within the classes that are coming.
Sure. Well, I know that there has been some discussion too in trying to move more towards some alignment with like the social studies courses, and having whether it directly precedes the year in which they study something, or it perfectly aligns that most students are taking both the same year. But I think that's a great idea. So here is our timeline from tonight moving forward. Obviously, we're presenting to you. We have 2 more PD days ahead of us. That time goes so very quickly. But as I mentioned, 912 ELA will be doing, continuing their work relative to the commonalities, moving on to create common curriculum maps, and then from those designing their assessments. 612 teachers working on the common literary terms and defining those. I will be meeting with our 6-8 teachers on the next PD day in the morning to kind of unpack the reading units for Lucy Hawkins and determine which ones will be aligned at each of the grade levels because they span 6-8. Our 4th and 5th grade teachers are going to use time on our next PD day to really unpack the units and start to watch some of the videos that are provided by Lucy Hawkins, just to kind of walk through what's within a kit and what does the structure look like. Our K3 teachers, as we mentioned before, are going to be learning more about the Fountas and Pell programs. Our K2 teachers are piloting those phonics programs. Our hope is that by the April PD day, we will be able to kind of have some really good discussions and decide next steps relative to moving forward with one phonics program. And we're continuing to review our intervention programs. We are currently using the LLI intervention program across K3. Our 4th and 5th grade teachers, interventionists, are actually visiting Gurney next week to observe that program being used because they're very interested in growing it. It is a K-12 program, so there's plenty of opportunity if we're really feeling like it's working with students.
So our timeline continued from June to August. We have our K-8 teachers that are obviously doing the Lucy units. They are identifying a date where we're going to get together to have common prep and planning time. In addition, all of the TBT times at Gurney have been rolled over into Lucy days. So we've been doing a lot of planning and unpacking there. Also at the intermediate school, we looked at certain dates to get in there and just start going through, unpacking, asking questions, printing out things that we need. We've had several teachers, as I almost said as Lucy, as Becky said, that have been seeing a unit where it would fit into their existing curriculum and have been putting it in, and we've been getting a lot of feedback from teachers about different things. Also, we, with the training, the F&P programs, if we have identified if that is going to be a need, we will definitely get training for our teachers for that. And I'm hoping this summer to go to Columbia to the Teachers Reading Institute and go through some training myself. In addition, in August, we have some workshop dates available. We're getting workshop dates available if needed for teachers that can't attend the trainings in June, just to try to provide as many options as possible for teachers to receive training in different ways. And the BAS, or the BAS benchmarking system, is another system that it's a system that basically measures the reading behaviors of students at certain levels and then matches them with appropriate text. So it's a leveling system. So a lot of that is kindergarten, for instance, does use that, but then it has switched as the children have moved on. So really just getting a universal screener in place to see the continuum for our students and how they're growing from grade to grade. In October and December, we'll do follow-ups. They call them like boot camp sessions with our trainer, just check-ins, addressing issues, addressing certain things that are coming up. One of the things that has kind of come up is really being thoughtful of how we're aligning our grammar practices with the writing curriculum, the writing units of study, making sure that's all aligned, and what are we teaching when and with what unit. And also the word study, vocabulary, spelling approach, handwriting is also going to be huge as well. So there are lots of parts that are still being put in place. And then in 9-12, we will be refining and creating the common assessments for the end of the second semester, because the first semester ones will be in place. So at the high school right now, my work is looking at those power standards and sort of working with teachers on how those assessments could possibly look. So that's my work is at the high school.
So moving into January of next year through April, the continued work, as Katie said, with word study, grammar, conventions, programming, the mapping of all of our courses, now that we'll have those programs in place and kind of know which order makes most sense for our students. And we're hopeful that Katie will get into teacher training this summer at Teachers College in reading, and then we can follow that up with the coaches reading training. They recommend that you start at the teacher level and get trained, and then halfway through that following year you attend the coaches training, so then it's how are you instructing others on the use. So we're hopeful that she'll be accepted into that, and then similarly we plan to do the same thing with writing, so that hopefully by 2022 Katie's going to be fully trained as a coach, so that she can really support as we add teachers or teachers transition to different grade levels. She can really be our local support.
I kind of get a little jealous when the trainer comes out from Perry, because I'm like, these are my teachers, so.
And I don't think I mentioned that, but the trainer from Perry, she actually works for Teachers College throughout the summer, and they charge a pretty hefty amount through Teachers College to bring those trainers here. She is going to work with our district and provide workshop training, not Lucy Calkins, but workshop training to our teachers for three days, 2 days, which would be reading and writing. And if we go with Lucy Phonics, she also is credentialed in the Foundations program, so either way with Phonics, we're inviting her to come. So it's really a fiscally responsible way to provide teacher training. We did a survey of all of our teachers that touch K-8 ELA, and there are only 7 teachers that have any conflicts with training on those dates. So we're hopeful that we can pick them up if we identify 1 or 2 dates in August. So we're really excited to move forward.
So a couple of things, when we started this, I really asked them to look at consistency. I think you heard that word a o'clock tonight in K-8 and then in 9-12. And articulate philosophy for our parents understood what they could expect along the way. This has been a tremendous amount of work, and this is a big adoption for the school district. I think I'll ask the question, but I think it's important for a board member. And every time there's an adoption, there's a change in practice. It's different on the receiving end from home. Sometimes that creates a little feedback. So just from a board perspective, implementation of this program, what would look different, be different, any areas of concern you think that we should front load the board with?
I don't think there will be any areas of concern. I think you'll see much more writing of students, students actually handwriting things as well.
I think, one of the things, just as a parent in this district, and having a child that was in a class that used one of the units just to sort of test it out, the Lucy units are designed to really get children to love reading. And I had a non-reader at home who really struggles with reading, is actually receiving Tier 2B support for her phonemic awareness. And after she did a Lucy unit, she's in love with reading. And she also is an amazing teacher, and there's like a lot of factors, but it's just different how they start talking about books and the language that they start using. I mean, we were amazed with these little kids and just what they were using and how they were saying things, so that was huge. I don't know,
Yeah, just that being able to articulate what you're doing. I've told this story a couple times, but it's still not my heart. In Hudson, I was sitting with a kindergartner, and she was a struggling reader, and she was going through a book, reading a book to me, and she stopped when she got to a word that was unfamiliar, and I thought, oh gosh, I'm not really sure what I'm supposed to do because I don't know the program. And she pointed up at the picture, and she said, I'm using picture power to figure this one out. And that's the way they present it in kindergarten as superpowers. So it was very appropriate, but it was so cool for her to be able to say exactly what she was going to do, and there was a strategy behind it.
Right.
So I was thinking, gosh, we have relatively amazing scores right now. Think about if we had a structure like this in place across K-8, what our kids would be able to do. There is so much flexibility too with it's high quality literature, first of all, that's a part of all of the Lucy programs. And so teachers, there aren't basal readers. So instead of it being textbooks that we're spending money on, we're purchasing libraries for each of the classrooms that are leveled by that Faunus and Pinnell level. So teachers can pull books that are appropriate for students but align with the units that they're teaching. So it's just such a nice opportunity for everyone to kind of be studying and talking about the same thing, but reading things and doing things that are appropriate to their level. And they also have below benchmark libraries as well in shelves. So we're purchasing those for each of the grade levels so that our students that maybe aren't quite reading at grade level could still participate. They're just reading something that's appropriate for them.
And one of the things that the teachers just love is that each unit, what you do is you register it, and then all the resources you need are there. So if you need to pair texts because they're writing an argumentative piece, there's several options that children can choose from, but it's already done for you. And that's such a huge time saver for teachers. And then you have multiple kids picking what they want to do and be engaged and what they want to argue about, and have a list of 10 topics to choose from. So it's really cool.
Any other questions?
And you can tell it's a lot of work.
Well, thank you so much for your support of this position. It has been amazing. So
It's been amazing having her. Thank you.
Everyone's been great. So
Her and Barb, it's been awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. I think we're going to take a 5-minute bio break. And we'll pick it up again. So 10 till. Ready to roll?
Ready.
Okay, Ms. Bruno, do you have a report?
No report.
All right, moving on. Are there any community members here that would like to address the board? Seeing none, we'll move forward. Consent. Could I? Mr. Hunt, would you like to go through the consent?
There's a motion.
Okay, we'll move. I have a motion for consent agenda items 7A through T.
You probably don't want to do T, you want to just do the last,
I'm sorry.
right?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, through S.
Through S.
So moved.
Second?
Second. We don't. We just, unless
Any discussion? All right. Seeing none, Ms. Bruno, please take the roll.
Mr. Rankin?
Yes.
Mr. Kinsberger?
Yes.
Mrs. Gross?
Yes.
Mrs. Garvey?
yes.
Mrs. O'Toole?
Yes.
Okay, now we will go for item 7T.
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Ms. Bruno, take the roll.
Mr. Rankin?
Abstain?
Mr. Kinsberger?
Yes.
Mrs. Gross?
Yes.
Mrs. Garvey?
Yes.
Mrs. O'Toole?
Yes.
Mr. Hunt, do you want to go through the recommendations?
Just a motion.
All right, I have a motion for the superintendent's recommendations 8A through E.
So moved.
Do I have a second? All right, Dr. Hunt, address now. Finally.
Item A is an extension of medical leave request for Katie Brent, a Kennedy School teacher. Item B is the awarding or recommendation to award reassignment of Matthew Cohn to night custodian campus coordinator. Just to point out, not an additional position replacement. Item C is the change in kindergarten entrance, which was discussed earlier. Mrs. O'Toole. Item D is the second reading of policies brought up at last meeting, and item E is a continuation of the online services for OSTA.
Item D, last time on first reading, I suggested some changes to GBIAR that I thought everyone agreed to. I noticed it wasn't updated, so can we still make those updates? Remember, it was like correcting the verb tense and clarifying. And
Okay. You
Yeah.
didn't get updated?
No.
Oh, okay.
I'll hand it again.
Okay. I was just going to say with regard to GBIA, the crowdfunding, I don't want to put anybody on the spot, Dr. Hunt, but maybe just a quick overview of if a parent or a student in the district wanted to start a crowdfunding campaign, kind of what this policy spells out, and then also, I guess, the answer that would be, is there a way for us to proactively get information out in the community just so people are aware that there is a policy now in place?
Yeah, so I can certainly address that through some communications. What I do with policies now is I will start to include them in the email. I'll draw attention to specific ones. This one I've already reviewed with building principals and kind of talk through this. Obviously, I think by having this policy, there's a recognition that we understand that this is kind of the direction fundraising is going.
Sure.
But we also understand this could be inadvertently doing some things that don't align with district mission.
Right,
And so I
exactly.
think rationale-wise, this is a good move by the Board of Education to start this conversation. Basically puts procedures around if you want to include crowdfunding, which would include kind of filling out a form request, come to the superintendent for approval, that I would have a list of approved fundraising platforms, and that all has to be kind of approved through our offices prior to the launching of the campaign.
What we talked about with the forms is we currently have fundraising forms that are already in place. How consistently they're being used, we're not totally sure. So that's something that we need to improve. We're just going to take this and put it on that form so that there's not a fundraising form, then a crowdfunding form, and we're going to combine it all. It's just get it there.
So at a high level, if it's an initiative that's aimed at something that benefits the district or a district staff member, even, they would need to go through a process of making sure that the district is the recipient of the funds. That's a big deal as far as taxes go, that it's in alignment with other district initiatives. You're not accidentally raising money for a computer that, doesn't fit with our technology program. So I think it's great the staff understand, and I know you've been really proactive about that. I was just thinking the lay community or parent who may not be aware that there's actually a policy to go through.
Yeah, the other avenue, I just thought about, the other meeting tomorrow morning is to take dinner council, because they do want to fundraise
Right.
as well. Just to review that with them. So
Right.
I'll add that to the list as well.
And the other question I had was with regard to KGC. I've seen, I'm sorry, Mr. Wipter's not here, but I know we have some new signage around the grounds with regard to the no smoking, no tobacco use. I was wondering, with regard to our property outside of the buildings, if we have signage posted as well, and do our community organizations that are using our property understand that there is a no use of tobacco if you're using even our baseball field, for example?
I can't speak to the signage aspect of it. No tobacco on our property and alcohol, well, that's been adjusted now. It's not necessarily new. It's been an expectation that we enforced as visitors and comments of smoking outside of gates or we do enforce. I guess I would assume people understand that and know that. But I have not seen a large issue or problem in that area.
If we don't have signage on the grounds, it might be something to look at, because I think we do have visitors to the grounds that maybe they only have students in the district and aren't aware that it's against school policy.
I also wanted to just bring up IKF, which is graduation requirements. Once upon a time, the district minimum and statutory graduation requirements were different, which is why there was this 2-column format. And now they're the same. And I know, like, I think the last time we redid the manual, we went to a 1-column, and I think probably because this comes from OSBA, it's back to a 2-column, but both columns read exactly the same. So to me, it's like, why would we have 2 columns when it's the same thing? So, I don't know, is there, I guess, it doesn't matter, but it's just, I think to the
I think it's just, if you do increase them, or
Yeah.
kind of stating what's in law as well as what your district has.
I just remember, they used to be different and now it's the same, so
Yeah.
it's, but I can live with that.
Mr. Henn, as you're reviewing the tobacco signage, just look at the bottom of page 1. There's some things that indicate that I thought we were saying this is the kind of signage we would be providing, so it just might be a good review.
All right, any further discussion? Ms. Marino, if you please take the roll.
Mr. Reagan.
Yes.
Mr. Kanziger.
Yes.
Mrs. Rose.
Yes.
Mrs. Garvey.
Yes.
Mrs. O'Toole.
Yes.
Treasurer's recommendations, can I have a motion for treasurer's recommendations 9A through C?
So moved.
And second,
Second.
Bruno, would you like to walk us through these?
Absolutely. Item A is a donation. This is some training equipment from Kevin Holly, is that pronounced correctly?
Correct.
For a value of $6,339. Item B is, there's only one menu now on this month, and we'll see, don't get too excited, because at the next meeting, there will be a few more.
Oh, okay.
And this one actually is my department. This was the workers' comp, that the way they sent the invoice out, we switched. I get a little gold star, and I think we get a discount if I request to no longer receive invoices, and I did that. It was then on me to go in and actually print off the invoice, and I did not do that. So that one's on me. Item C is equipment disposal. We have some items from the fitness center, and I believe a desk to be disposed of. I'm recommending your approval.
Any discussion? none, if you would take the roll.
Mr. Regan.
Yes.
Mr. Kanziger.
Yes.
Mrs. Rose.
Yes.
Mrs. Garvey.
Yes.
Mrs. O'Toole.
Yes.
Okay, does anybody have any other business they'd like to introduce?
We just, I believe it's next board meeting that we have Senator Bellin coming. To stop by. I've given him a few topics of conversation. Ed Choice, Cup Patterson. Ed Choices, I just saw an email come through. Something's happening tonight, right now. So maybe that will be resolved by then, or maybe we'll be able to kind of enlighten us a little bit. If there's anything else that you are interested in, his office has reached out, so just let me know and I'll add it to the list.
The OFCC thing, I know we're getting different pieces of information about the eligibility, but it would be interesting to hear from him, because we're on the eligibility list, it's confusing as to,
Yeah, I think we put something in the board report about our ability to access that money. And do you remember the term in which we have to be classified?
Remember the verbiage, because they do have different levels and they have their own terms of how they classify us, but the $1 million, is the $1 billion, is that what you're talking about, the up to that? It's very specific, and from what I understood from the person that I spoke with, and I don't recall her name, but I'll pull it out of the board report again, and because I think that's where I documented it. It doesn't sound like it's an option for us at this point. I know we're eligible, but you have to be in CFAP, which we are not, so that's the current term, right? And you have to be there, and we're not. So it's not something we can do right at this point in time.
When we originally looked at it, it was with Chris from TDA, and he said it was at least 10 years out before we would be eligible to enter that program. And then I know Ashley called directly to verify, and the same explanation came from both places.
I feel like the last time Senator Bowman was here, it was one of the things that he spoke to us about as a positive for us. That's why perhaps he has a different perspective on what we're hearing.
Yeah, I honestly,
We certainly asked them, and
Yeah.
we may want to encourage that. I mean, part of the issue of why they're trying to open this up is there's districts that are eligible that can't pass their local share. So it was an effort to kind of start to move down the list a little bit more people that can actually pass. So if we're still 10 years out, it may be something we ask for advocacy to open that a little up so we can access
Okay,
it.
so I would like just to talk about it.
Yeah.
I think from what I remember from years ago, yes, we're on the list, but we're like number
500 something,
on
yeah.
the list. And so all those other schools are ahead of us.
Right.
Yeah,
So-
But that's what this is.
But that's what this, so this is to circumvent that.
right.
It is, but you still
But you
have to
still
be.
have to
You
be
still have
in
to
your
be in
window.
CFAP.
And I don't think we're in our we don't have a window yet.
You're essentially forfeiting some of the value you would get if
Yes.
you waited
Right.
25 years,
Right.
right? And our number would then be $1 million, which had to be designated as a CFAP, and I don't remember the specifics around CFAP,
Okay.
which we would not reach
Right.
that designation.
But
for.
we've never
It-
exercised it, so it's interesting that like, it got put in place and then we have to wait 15 years before we can exercise the option to get the $1 million in advance and forego future support.
Right.
So I was curious how, like, that doesn't seem to fit with the intent of the law for me.
What,
And then the other question I had, which occurred to me, I think we were CFAP eligible when we did the 2011 master planning that the state helped us with. Remember those reports from
Sure, yeah.
2011 for each of the buildings? So I wondered if maybe that was why we had to wait to be eligible, because we used, I think, I wasn't on the board then, so Mary Kay, you might remember, did we use state funding to do our master planning back in 2011?
so to do master planning through the state?
Well,
You're
they
talking
did
just planning?
facility
They do that for
assessment.
free.
Yeah,
They
they
did,
do
oh, they
that.
do.
They do that for
Okay.
every district, that's
Okay.
part of the
Okay.
process.
Every
You
so
can
many
do that
years.
every so many
Yeah.
years.
Okay, because I thought you don't have to be CFAP eligible to have your facility assessments done? Okay.
No, you can have your facility assessment done, and then this $1 million that you can access, you have to be in CFAP, and it has to be a project that's in their master plan that they put together, and it has to be educational facilities. So,
Right.
you know, we're looking for, bus garage would not be possible at all. Gurney STEM wing maybe, but it had to have been in their master plan. if that was
In
not.
their facility assessment of our, which it was,
Okay.
yeah.
Um,
But,
so-
thank you, that's.
Yeah, so there's that portion of it, and then there's you still have to be in CFAP. And I think to your point about the intent,
Right.
I think Bob's point is a good point. I think that was more for districts who, they're in the timeline, and they can't pass the bond to get it done. So if they can just match and just take this $1 million rather than a $20 million building, at least it's something.
Right,
And then it moves them off the list so that more of these people down here can start getting,
right.
moving into them.
I totally agree with you. I think that is a potential benefit. I had interpreted that the other type of district that could benefit would be ours, where we would probably never have enough of a match from the state to make it worthwhile to do a project that involved taking state
Right.
funds.
Here, we'll just put back in the board report what we wrote, and if there's specific questions beyond that, because I know we both called and got the same answer.
Yeah, no, I just want to speak with him about, because I think it would be good for him to hear us advocating for this, if perhaps it's not written currently in a way to serve a district like ours.
Yeah, but if we're going to do that, I want to understand exactly what we're asking them to change, so we don't have to look at
Okay.
Well, in essence, our taxpayers are paying into this fund, as all state taxpayers are, and our district hasn't benefited from Ohio School Facility Commission funding. I mean, that's really what we're saying is there more work that we can do so that a district like ours can at least have some type of a financial benefit and not wait, you know. We may never get to the top of that list.
And I know, when it was OFCC, whatever, the name changes,
Yes.
whatever. I remember one time we were looking, whatever project we were doing, and we were eligible for like a 5% match, but then you have to build according to their standards.
Right,
And that was
that's
so
what I
not what we
mean.
wanted to
Yeah,
do, so.
exactly.
Yeah.
And then I'll tag onto that, my update was some of the board members from Northeast Ohio got together last week, and we were really just doing a transition of, if you have a new board president coming in, and introduction, so there were some new people there. What was really interesting was a couple of districts who have still not gotten reimbursed. The high school at Cleveland Heights, University Heights, they're still waiting for reimbursement from the Ohio School Facilities Commission. And that project has been done for a while. So they're kind of like, don't even count on it when they tell you you're going to get the money, because it's far off. They also notified us, and I'll send an email to you guys, that there's a Cup Patterson talk being sponsored, I think, for the League of Women Voters that will be in Cleveland Heights in a couple weeks, if anybody's interested. It's actually, Patterson will be there to give an update on that.
Yeah, our rate is still $5.90.
We're not moving fast
Yeah.
up that list.
Okay, any other discussion? Any other items? Great. Next meeting is going to be Wednesday, February 19th at 6 p.m. here in the Sands Room. And Mr. Kanziger, want to kick us off?
In accordance with Ohio Revised Code 121.22, the Chagrin Falls Board of Education will go into an executive session for the sole purpose of the consideration of any of the following matters. Employment.
I will second that.
Don't expect any action after executive
We
session.
still need to vote though.
Okay. Will you take the roll? Yes.
Mr. Kanziger?
Yes.
Mrs. Rose?
Yes.
Mrs. Darby?
Yes.
Mrs. O'Toole?
Yes.